Hola everybody, we're going to talk about demand and quantity demanded. Those two terms sound alike, but they're a little bit different. So let's explain what the difference is. Let's take a look at the graph on the left side. Here we have a demand curve, downward sloping demand curve. And if we have a shift in the demand curve, in other words, if the entire demand curve shifts from D1 to D2, we call that an increase in demand. So that's when the whole entire curve shifts. Now, why does the curve shift to the right? Well, that would be an increase in demand. An increase in demand is because of any changes, because of any one of those demand determinants. Remember the 6 demand determinants from a few sections ago? For example, an increase in incomes, or if the price of a related product changes, or if the number of buyers increases, or if the future price of the product changes. That would cause the entire demand curve to shift to the right, and that's called an increase in demand. In the graph on the right, we're going to show an increase in quantity demanded. So what is an increase in quantity demanded? Well, an increase in quantity demanded is when the curve actually does not shift, so there's no change in demand, there's no increase or decrease in demand. But it is when we move from one point on the curve, so for example this point on the curve, to another point on the curve. So that would be because we go from point A to point B. That's because the price decreases. So let's say we have a price change from $5 to $3. So the price of the product goes down, and as a result, we see that we are going to buy more quantity, let's say from 30 to 40. So we see that 40 people are buying at point B at a lower price as opposed to 30, and that is an increase in quantity demanded. So quantity demanded changes because the price of the product itself decreases in this case, and there's no actual shift in the curve by itself. Now you might ask, why does the price of the product change or go down in this case? Well, the price of the product goes down. Well, that's because there must have been an increase in supply. So we probably had S1 going to S2, the supply increased, which made the price go down. The difference between supply and quantity supplied is similar to the difference between the demand and quantity demanded. It's just everything's with the supply curve. So on the right, we're going to have an increase in supply. So an increase in supply, if you remember what an increase in demand was, that's when the whole demand curve shifted. So an increase in supply is very similar. So that's when the whole supply curve shifts. So let's say we have an increase in supply. So the supply curve shifts to the right. S1 goes to S2. That is an increase in supply. So an increase in quantity supplied. Let's take a look at the graph on the right. Let's go from one point on the curve to the next point on the curve. Let's say we go from point C to point D on the supply curve. We don't shift the supply curve, but we move from one point on the curve, from point C to point D. Well, that must have happened because the price of the product increased. So we might have gone from $3 to $5. And if the price increases, then it's more profitable for businesses to make the product so that they will increase their supply, quantity supplied. And you might ask yourself, why did the price increase from $3 to $5? Why did that happen in the market? Well, the reason why that would happen is there must have been an increase in demand. More people wanted to buy the product. Maybe their incomes were going up. So demand shifted, let's say from D1 to D2. And that is what caused us to go from point C at the initial equilibrium to point D at the second equilibrium. And when we move along the supply curve like that, when the supply curve itself does not shift, we call that an increase in quantity supplied.